Nelson, you're still muted.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are around the world. This is Dr. Nelson Ogunshakin. Welcome to the FIDIC COVID-19 series of webinar. Today, we are looking at the impact of developing crisis in the management in industry perspective. We've now done 9 of the 18 in the series. And today, really, the focus is really to bring experts around the world. We have speakers from America, speaker from Netherlands, speaker from UK, from part of Africa, and also our president, as usual, who will give our opening speech. As you know, for those who've been following us, we've covered quite a number of topics over the last 10 weeks. We started off looking at the issue about what does this COVID-19 means for the industry. We had an excellent panel of speakers. We went from there to address the issue about force majeure. How is this impacting contract? We dealt with the issue about joint venture. We also looked at the issue about consultancy and the impact on consultancy agreement. We spent a lot of time to look at insurance and alternative dispute resolution. We went to look at the issue about digital, how the world of digital working virtual, what does it mean for people? And we look at the impact on employment, people, and our health and safety. And this time we're looking at the issue about crisis response. Do we have enough contingency plan? Do we have enough strategy in place? Have we learned anything from the current crisis that will help us to address the future? People talked about different crises, and people talked about World Uncertainty Index. I'm told by my eminent advisor that currently COVID is rate 850 compared to financial crisis, which is 340, and when we had Iraq was 550. It shows that this is a major concern for the industry. People talked about whether there is going to be an issue about a V shape or a U shape or a W shape in the COVID. In another word, are we going to have another spike in the future? Nobody knows. One thing we know for sure, until there is a vaccination, this will continue to be a challenge for us. So this particular morning, we're going to cover the topic. We hope to be with you for about 1 hour, 30 minutes. The first 5 minutes, which is my introduction. After that, I will move on to introduce our president, who will say a few words. Then each panel speaker will spend 10 minutes each to address the particular topic from their own perspective, from their own geography, from their own background. Thereafter, by 1 hour time, we should finish all the speaking session, and there will be a Q&A session. For those who are waiting to join us and put questions to the panel, I will ask you to hold your breath for a while and wait until you are given the indication. In an hour's time, the system will be set up to allow you to put questions to the panelists. I will do my best to get your panel message across, and after that, we will summarize and close out in 1 hour, 30 minutes time. So on that note, it is my pleasure once again to invite our president, Bill Howard from United States, to say a few words and share, start the meeting for us. Bill, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Nelson, and welcome to webinar number 10. The first thing I'd like to mention is my sincere thanks to Nelson and his secretariat staff for putting these webinars together. As I said, this is the 10th one in a series of 18. So far, they've gone exceedingly well. We've got good comments on them, and the content has been quite good. Under any circumstance, having a global kind of webinar on these different subjects would be a challenge. Under the current pandemic, with people working from home, that makes the challenge very, very, very difficult. And it's really a fine reflection on Nelson and the Secretariat for their ability to put these programs together. I'd also like to thank the speakers for spending time with us talking about the various subject matters, particularly today. They are very busy, like all of us. They have issues with their firms. They have lots of things to worry about, and in many cases, they're dealing with family issues as well, as we all are. So special thanks to them for preparing for these webinars and helping us present them. And finally, I'd like to thank everyone who's participating as a listener into the webinars. As Nelson said, we'll have a half hour at the end at the last part of the webinar for dialogue, questions and answers and that kind of thing. So we encourage your questions. We also encourage you to comment on the content of the webinars and give us any suggestions in that regard. Before turning it over to all the speakers, I wanted to share a few thoughts about the matter of developing crisis response plans. And I'm going to try to keep them relatively high level and relatively general, although I personally do have a knack for getting into detail quite a bit, so I'll try to avoid that as I can. But just some thoughts as you put together crisis scenarios. And a lot of it, what I'm about to say, is based on what we've been hearing in the previous webinars. The first thought I'd like you to consider is to take a broad view when developing crisis response plans. What I mean by that is to do everything you can to consider all parties' issues up and down the chain, from suppliers to team partners to the clients and funding agencies, et cetera. Try to identify as best you can what their issues are, so that your crisis response plan can be prepared to deal with those. I'd also suggest that you don't take too short a period of time to review, maybe an intermediate time period, or maybe even a long period. The pandemic, who knows how long this virus is going to be such a threat to us. But I think one thing that is pretty certain is that there will be impacts of what's happened in the last 2 or 3 months for our firms over the next 2 or 3 years. And also to recall what many of us are well aware of is that there's generally a lag in consulting, engineering, and construction before the impact of a crisis really hits us. Search for win-win scenarios with everyone as best one can. That's easy to say and very difficult to do, but I would suggest that it's very important to try to get win-win scenarios in developing your plans. That's always important. The role is we always advocate for the engineer to be the trusted advisor. Certainly helps if you're in that position. And number one, ask yourself the question how you keep people that you will need when the crisis starts to ebb, with projects being delayed or being executed in a more complex manner with PPE and that kind of thing, or stopped in general. There'll be a lot of pressure on staffing, but as the situation improves, we're going to need that staff. So we need to protect them as best we can. Nelson mentioned the type of recovery. We've heard a lot about that, of a V recovery, a W recovery, a lag recovery. I think all of us need to just be prepared for any type of recovery from that standpoint. Stimulus. In any problem that we've had like this in the past, there should be, and usually is, a push for infrastructure projects, which generally generate more revenue than what the investment in the actual infrastructure is. So we'd suggest twofold there: be prepared for infrastructure stimulus, but also lobby for it with your clients and those that can influence it. And speaking of infrastructure, how will infrastructure needs change? I think a lot of us believe that infrastructure will change. Perhaps there'll be more need for medical facilities. We talked to the international funding institutions recently, and they will be channeling money, at least in the short term, from some planned projects to medical. Transportation might be a different type of infrastructure in the future, and office space might be one as well. Up until the crisis, a lot of us in the consulting engineering field were doing everything we could to minimize the square footage or square meter requirement per person. Perhaps just the opposite will be the criteria going into the future. But some things will not change. We've still got climate change, and the need for energy, water resources, green buildings, etc. And we cannot lose sight of that. In addition, as we all know, we've got a huge sanitation issue and clean water issue for a large percentage of the world's population. FIDIC will be producing State of the World reports in that regard to remind us that that situation of infrastructure investment, particularly related to climate change, will not change. Scenario planning, I think I touched on that already, to be flexible. But expect things to change, just be flexible in terms of what the change will be. And whenever I think of change, it reminds me of the 1980s when people were predicting with the development of Intergraph and CAD and all of those kinds of fancy systems for design work. A lot of people were predicting that small firms wouldn't survive, and just the opposite happened, the absolute opposite. So be prepared from that standpoint, because you never really know what's going to happen. We heard also a lot about cash flow, certainly protecting cash, but also the cash flow. Watch out for the firms and individuals that are working with you that might need the cash, and get it to them as fast as they can, and then maybe see in other areas where you might be able to lay it. We heard a lot about claims management. Nelson mentioned that. We talked about insurance in previous webinars, and that picture did not look all that great in terms of getting after insurance to help firms with damages. So I'll refer you to that if you're interested in that subject. And finally, as Nelson said, we are very interested in what we can do for everybody. The State of the World report, these webinars that we're putting on, I should say State of the World reports that we'll be issuing, the webinars we're putting on, the guidance notes that we're providing, and we are wide open and interested in any other ideas as to how we can help. So with that, Nelson, I'll back to you.
Thank you very much, Bill. Thanks very much for that opening summary of all the stuff that we've covered before, and actually setting the scene as to what we should be heading out. At this point in time, I always try to invite a board member to give us a sort of a comment on the issue that we're trying to do. And it's my pleasure now to invite Mike Pehlig, who is a board member of FIDIC from Netherlands, to take the floor. Mike Pehlig, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Nelson, for the opportunity to speak here for a virtual audience, which is very special, also in my experience. Well, COVID is called an unprecedented crisis, but yeah, how can we expect that our leaders can respond to that under these circumstances? The world is faced by a complete unfamiliar enemy, and that is disrupting all certainties of our modern society. However, there's apparently a difference between countries like South Korea, Singapore, and Taiwan that learned from their bitter experience from the SARS epidemic, and the Western countries who seem to be a bit, let's say, sometimes waiting for what to do. So apparently, there may be the case that these Asian countries responded quicker because they had their immersion plans already in place, the crisis plans, because they had a bit of that experience. Anyway, I think that the pandemic demonstrates to us who are really crisis managers and leaders around the globe. Good crisis management is key, I think, and it's clear that the different attitudes that we see around the globe in governments, politicians, also demonstrate different approach of leaderships, sometimes triggered by the difference in culture, but also just by typical characters. Or odd characters, how you see the responses of the world leaders. I think you can recognize these differences when you go through the different stages of a crisis. So in the beginning, when I looked at how the world responded, it was very much engaging with the stakeholders, and the same applies for companies. You need to frame the right picture and repeat very clearly what is your purpose. You see expressions during the crisis like, we need to flatten the curve, obviously, for the purpose to prevent the collapse of a healthcare system. And another one is, of course, to protect the most vulnerable people in society. And the same is what you see in companies. I think when I look at the different member firms, they share their experience together. And you see that the first thing they say is, well, we need the first 4 or 5 bullets about their measures, all about the concern about their staff. The well-being of the staff, being in contact with the staff is very important. And the same thing is applicable for the cash situation, so the financial situation of companies. Protect your cash is very often encountered when you look at these crisis plans. So not communicating the purpose that can actually lead to a concern or a greater concern, rather than being very clear about what you want to communicate. Let's say if you look at the next stage as exploring what to do, I think it's very important to be very clear about how you want to fight the crisis and be realistic in what are the options. I've seen companies setting up task forces very quickly. Also in my own company, in Fugro, you see quite clearly from, I think it was in January, I was traveling with our global HSC director. And at the time, he was already setting up teams from around the globe to channel information, to know what's ongoing, but also one of the tasks is to look at the end game. So what can happen, or how can we respond to the crisis and advise the board? And similar applies to the member associations and member firms. I see very good examples in Europe, in the AFCA, and also in a lot of European member associations that set up task forces. Some of them are in direct contact with ministries of infrastructure, with the Minister of Infrastructure, to discuss opportunities to accelerate the programs, to make sure that cash keeps flowing and construction is continuing. So very important in my view to explore what you can do, but also bring all information together and channel that information. From these different, you've seen companies have already established different scenarios to tackle the different issues. And once you have decided what direction you want to go to, I think communication is very important to explain why, or what you have decided, why you're going to do it, and how it can work. So be very clear in that. I think you'll recognize that a bit in let's say in controlling functions, but also let's say as a sort of a military action when you show the logics about what you're going to do, and also communicate very clearly and be very simple in your explanation, so people really understand it. I think it's very key, and you see that also with governments when they explain social distancing, lockdown, and other measures. But also, let's say, look at different fallback scenarios once you think that your plan doesn't work. And well, execution, I think two things are very important when you execute your crisis plan. First, you need to have the focus. So really repeat and focus on your purposes. And second is continuously monitor what you're doing. And we've seen that with governments, but also in companies, having the right metrics, then you can really see if your strategy is working out. A crisis plan needs to have that clear parameter. Everyone needs to understand the parameters, else it doesn't work, and you cannot, let's say, capture the attention of your employees to do the right things to manage the crisis situation. So as a contrast, choosing the wrong parameters can also lead that you think you're on the right track, but you're even further from the target, from your objective, and the enemy can even take over and spread out even further. So the execution needs to be very much focused and with the right monitoring. With COVID-19, for instance, you see that focusing only on death rate and death count can be misleading and introduce even despair in an organization or in society. I think measuring your reserves as a parameter is an alternative. You see that the medical aid and let's say the reserves that you have in your medical support is very important to measure, besides, let's say, only the death rate. And the same applies for companies, I think. Many companies focus on cash and on, even if they have large cash reserves. I think nowadays, I wonder if many companies have that position. But if you have a large cash reserves, don't be too complacent by just saying, well, we can manage it. We've calculated we can manage this crisis and we can survive. But really focus on your position in the supply chain. How are your suppliers doing? What's the supply demand? But also what's then the demand of your clients? So that you have different parameters that you focus on your financial situation. And I think last but not least, let's say when you execute your plan, continuously evaluate, because in this crisis that is unknown, a lot of uncertainties. You're not sure about how it's going to be in 1 or 2 months' time, that you really learn from each other. And once information comes in, new information comes in, that you allow to be transparent in changing your direction. So I think also, let's say, in that stage of evaluating what you're going to do, I think the leadership needs to be very clear and transparent. No surprises, be very clear in communication. And I think also modesty is very important. When you look at leadership around the globe, you see that some leaders are not at all modest, but they are very strong in their belief about what needs to be done. And I think a bit of modesty is one of the assets, one of the skills that you need as a leader to really, let's say, keep the credibility of your staff, of your people in your country, and also try to modify and adapt when it is needed, and still keep that credibility. So, and the opposite can happen. I think that we can see some danger here and there, I think, in society, where, let's say, leaders can even undermine collective efforts of improving the situation just by not taking into account good advice from the public, from experts. So, in summary, in my belief, a good crisis plan is depending on one, your leadership skills, being modest and being transparent, and also excellent communication. Thank you very much, Nelson.
Thank you very much, Mark, for that sort of a holistic way of looking at it. I like the idea of understanding the engagement strategy, who you're talking to, what to do. You talk about scenario planning, and you finish up with by saying communication and leadership is absolutely important. These are the real value, and I think we can build on that, Mark. I'm now going to invite Mitch to take the floor. Mitch Simpler from Jaros and Baum in New York City, in the heart of the COVID activity in United States. So Mitch, the floor is yours. Thank you. Can you unmute, Mitch, please? Can you unmute? Thank you. Yes,
thank you.
Thank you.
Again, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone, to whom it applies. It is, again, a real honor and privilege for me to speak before this august group, albeit virtually, once again. As mentioned earlier, I am Mitch Simpler. I'm the immediate past chair of ACEZ, the American Council of Engineering Companies, and currently I am serving as a partner and the managing partner emeritus of Jaros, Baum, and Bolles, which, for the purposes of this, is a privately held consulting firm located in New York City. To give you some background and to give you my perspective and where it's coming from, our firm just turned 105 years old and specializes in the design of MEP and fire protection systems for predominantly commercial, institutional, medical, and cultural facilities literally around the globe. Equally important is the simple fact that the vast majority of my and my firm's clients are firmly planted in the private sector market and not in the infrastructure and public works sectors. Also, I would be remiss if I failed to mention the simple fact that our one and only office for our global practice is located in downtown Manhattan in New York City, which in and of itself has been a real issue for the past 13 weeks, given the fact that New York City has been and remains the epicenter for COVID-19 in the US and all of North America. I'm here to share with all of you what, in hindsight, have been some of our successes as well as some of our less than successful endeavors. And for the record, it was not for the fact that we did or did not have a plan, because we did have a crisis plan, and it just not necessarily worked out to be for this specific crisis. As engineers, we ran to the problem with enthusiasm and cautious optimism all at the same time. What has made this crisis so devastating was the sheer number of unknowns, which we all know as engineers makes planning for both the short and long terms that much more difficult. Simple issues such as testing, so that we can better identify who has the disease today, who has had it, when is the pandemic going to end, where can I, my family, my staff get testing, and it goes on and on and on. The real question is, when can we go back to work, and what will work look like? How do I, my staff, and my clients, and everyone else, how do we get to work? The doctors and the list of unknowns goes on and on and on. as individual and as member of our own firm, we look around us to see what is happening. And as humans, we are hungry for information to help us make better decisions, as well as provide feedback regarding the decisions that we've already executed. This information gathering and organizing is where FIDIC, and in my case, the local member office, which is ACEZ, are so critical and crucial to the success of our member firms during these crisis moments. And let's face it, the single biggest issue facing all of our member firms, as well as each and every one of our clients, is cash flow. Every firm, as well as every client, immediately went into survival mode in an effort to preserve cash. This simple issue has had profound impacts across every sector, especially the private sector, and in the US alone has resulted in over 30 million workers losing their jobs. ACEZ has helped the US step up their information gathering and disseminate information across all of the market sectors and provided invaluable information and, most importantly, peer group feedback in essentially real time. ACEZ held and continues to hold leadership roundtables based on firm size, firm specialty, and geographic specialities. In a similar level of detail and frequency, they also have live CFO forums to help guide firms in their financial moments of need. As importantly, they provided thought leadership, guidance, and shared best practices for each of the 52 member offices, and these continue on a twice-a-week frequency. As a New York firm, we pivoted towards our clients in the healthcare sector. Each of these healthcare sectors and hospitals were facing truly unbelievable and unprecedented challenges, starting with the potential patient growth that has never been seen in modern human history. The expected infection rate in New York alone was in the millions, and the hospitalization requirements in New York City exceeded a number of available beds by 4 times that which was actually available. And by the way, all this time scale was the growth of the infection was going to be happening in a matter of weeks, not in months and years. The consulting engineering industry, coupled to the construction industry, all under the umbrella of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and the Greater New York Hospital Association, built an incredible number of COVID patient facilities, as well as countless mobile testing facilities in direct response to this unprecedented crisis. All in the meanwhile, trying to reposition our firms to work from home again paradigm, significant cash flow issues, and client viability issues. The best news is that the process of building the hospitals, these temporary hospitals, was a huge success. I'm proud to say that my firm was intimately involved in it. And the best news is, as a result of flattening the rate of infection growth, many of those beds have not been needed yet. It's been discussed amongst the previous speakers, and I think it will become a topic later in this webinar. What will be the second wave? Will there be a second wave? And if so, how bad will it be? And for that reason, these temporary hospitals, we believe, will be, unfortunately, necessary. So, as I stated earlier, there are still too far many unknowns. The latest concern of many of us New Yorkers is what can we expect with the easing of the restrictions in an effort to begin the arduous task of restarting the global economic engine without restarting the global pandemic. So these are truly incredible and unprecedented times, and it is my hope that we can all walk away today with answers to some of these truly pressing questions. Nelson, I turn it back to you.
Mitch, thank you very much. It's really good to get your view from the New York City. I'm really impressed to hear that, once you are centrally based in New York, your remit and your client base and your activities is global, and you're able to do that. But what I also find very interesting is you are at the heart of the United States in terms of the COVID-19 and how your company and ACEZ have been able to respond to that. And that's quite interesting because I think the idea of thought leadership, getting people together, and using the ACEZ as an organization which can talk to government. It shows us that there's a lot of role and activity which the local association can play. On that note, I'm actually quite interested and really happy to have Chituwa, Sinkala, joining us as Chief Executive of our Strategic Consulting Engineer in Botswana. Chituwa, the floor is yours. Perhaps you can give us your perspective on how you've responded. My understanding that you are not coming out of it, you are still in it, and maybe your perspective is actually slightly different. So please, let's have your contribution. Chituwa, the floor is yours. Thank you. Can you unmute, please, Chituwa?
Greetings to everybody listening and watching this very exciting and enlightening webinar series. I believe it's number 10, and it's a very brilliant initiative by the FIDIC. So very, very, very good initiative. I do hope you're keeping safe during this trying time. My name is Chituwa Chulu, the Chief Executive Officer of the Association of Consulting Engineers of Zambia. So this is an association whose objective is to promote the business interests of both the local and foreign consulting firms operating in Zambia. It is undeniable, as everybody has alluded to earlier on, that the COVID-19 has had a negative impact on the consulting engineering industry, with particular regards to the way business is conducted. In as much as Zambia is on partial lockdown, the frequency of monitoring and supervision of projects has drastically reduced, affecting project delivery time. There is now a new normal, I may call it that, a new normal in which we need to adapt. Non-essential workers are encouraged to work from home, which comes with its own challenges. For instance, it's not in our culture to work from home. We know of it, we know that there's an issue of working from home, but we've never really experienced it. And most of our members, most of our consulting engineering firms are actually reporting that there's anxiety levels amongst their employees, leading to a very high influx of emails and phone calls, and the majority of them really are trivial. And this is due to the fact that employees are worried of their jobs, their job security. They're not sure if they'll have a job tomorrow. So their senses are on high alert. So this brings in the issue of stress. So it's paramount now that going forward, we need to start counseling, free counseling if possible, counseling our staff, our employees. And this is something that the Association of Consulting Engineers of Zambia is now going to start emphasizing and pushing down on our members to start counseling the employees. So in as much as we can adapt working from home, it comes with its own challenges, because here in Zambia we have to deal with unreliable telecommunication infrastructure, power outages, which has been a problem in Zambia before, but now it has been amplified. We're encouraged to adhere to social distancing. This in itself is a challenge, be it in the office environment or on a construction site. It's a challenge. How do you ensure that you're distancing yourself? I'm aware from the previous webinars that FIDIC has hosted, one of the speakers was saying that on some construction sites, some workers have sensors, but again, it comes with a cost, for us as a nation or for the consulting engineer. So these are things, again, we need to consider going forward. So in response to the COVID-19, the Zambian government has had to divert funds it would have paid our members towards the fight against the pandemic, which is very, very commendable one, right? But this has negatively affected our members as revenue streams have considerably reduced. And as if this is not bad enough, the consulting engineering industry for the past 4 years has been in a crisis. It has experienced delayed payments from its biggest client, which is the government of the Republic of Zambia. making it almost impossible for the consultant to meet statutory and financial obligations, because there's a problem with the cash flow. And then this, banks are calling in for their dues, bringing some of our consulting firms to the brinks of foreclosure. So in order to cushion these crippling effects of delayed payments, a debt swap was arranged, obviously, by the association with the Revenue Authority and a very willing government. So now, with the arrival of the COVID-19, coupled with delayed payments and the challenges that it had, literally brings the consulting industry to its knees. With the partial lockdown, firms are unable to explore other avenues of income generation other than on government projects. So it's very imperative that firms and MAs sustain themselves after and during this pandemic. The crisis plans need to be developed. As Bill said earlier on, the plans need to be very broad from the whole supply chain. It needs to be considered when we are coming up with these crisis plans. They need to be focused, they need to be reviewed, they need to be monitored. And as Mark said, if it's not working, we need to get back to the drawing board and see how best we can re-strategize and see how we can move forward. So in Zambia, firms now have to invest in alternative energy sources, for example, gensets, solar on commercial sites, and also now in homes of employees, because now they are working from home. The sad truth is that firms now will have to reduce on staff levels. Some personnel will unfortunately have to be replaced by machines. We all knew that automation was coming, but the COVID-19 is fast tracking this process. And we need to be on board as consulting engineers or also be left behind. There's the issue of reduced staffing. Once staff levels are reduced, the remaining staff will have to now obviously acquaint themselves with new skills. Supervisors will have to sharpen their communication skills and learn how to manage and motivate their teams remotely. Subordinates as well, the employees, will also have to learn how to effectively work remotely, which I said is the new norm now. It's the new norm. Risk assessments and standard operating procedures, SOPs, now they have to evolve to include management of pandemics. As the earlier speakers alluded to, and yourself, Nelson, we don't know if this is going to happen again. We don't know if it will be a V or a W, but now at least we can prepare for the future. Health checks will need to be included in the risk assessments. Human capital is one of the most important factor of production in any economy. And so the welfare of employees or clients, whoever they may be, during this pandemic is of paramount importance, even afterwards. It has been said that the wealth of the nation is dependent on the health of its people. And this could not be more true than it is today. And so there's a lot that we have to think about as associations and as consulting engineers and as FIDIC as a whole, with how we now proceed and move on to the new life, if I may call it that. Thank you.
Chituwa, thank you very much for that insightful way of looking at it. It's really interesting that whilst Mitch talked about what ACEZ is doing, is actually looking at your particular situation in terms of where things are in Zambia. And actually, a lot of people probably take things for granted, say it's not cultural to work from home. That's quite fundamental. And where you have energy crisis, then on top of that, people need to rely on the system or the infrastructure that they have, which may be limited. And on top of that, you got diversion of revenue or income or expenditure into other sources, which means consultants are going through major delay payment, and that's additional impact on the system. So it's interesting to get that perspective. I'm going to invite Anthony Hardingham to actually give us his perspective from Atkins' point of view, looking at it from UK and Europe. Whilst you're part of a big organization, I understand your focus is going to be very much from UK and Europe perspective. Anthony, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Nelson. Hello, everybody. I'm going to start with a bit of context. I'm a business development director for Atkins in the UK and Europe. We're part of the SNC-Lavalin group of companies. It's a professional engineering services business with around 11,500 staff in the UK and Europe region, and about 50,000 staff across the SNCL group globally. We serve clients, business to government and business to business across a range of markets, including water, defence, energy, transportation, security, local and central government, property and education. And our markets in the UK and Europe, at least, are still pretty active. There are some important exceptions to that, though. You know, with the likes of aviation, it's taken a big impact. Higher education, it's taken a big impact, and also commercial property. So those markets, you know, it's more of a U or possibly even an L in terms of aviation for that market. So you might be wondering what a business development guy is here to talk to you about developing crisis management plans. Well, hopefully all will become clear very shortly. So back in late February, early March, I was busy going about my daily business, keeping an eye on the emerging COVID-19 situation in China. And then we had the growth of cases in Italy. And I suppose I became increasingly worried. It wasn't really supposed to happen, was it? We'd seen Ebola, SARS, MERS rise and fall without really touching on Western Europe. And there'd not been a global pandemic really in living memory. So the biggest concern I heard from my friends was worries about their ski trip, you know. So it just highlights that until something like this affects you directly, human nature tends to downplay the risks. So 11 weeks ago, I received a call from our finance director asking if I could help him develop the business continuity planning related to the pandemic. And I suppose I was a little perplexed as to why me and why now. And this is where his first insight came. He wanted to appoint someone, you know, with real business experience and sort of high red energy levels to run the program. It was a complex situation, emerging situation, requiring lots of detailed planning and lots of timely decision making and a range of stakeholders. And there was a real concern that we might drift into committee mode and not make the progress we wanted. So his second insight was that he identified the issue relatively early, giving time to plan. We had 3 sort of valuable weeks prior to Boris Johnson, our PM's lockdown statement on the 23rd of March, and to get ready. And for the first 2 weeks, it was quite strange actually. It did feel that we were very much ahead of the thinking about the pandemic impact in the rest of the UK and North America. And this was uncomfortable at times. You know, we pressed on despite the views in some areas of our business that we were jumping, you know, too far ahead with our thinking. The risk became, however, very clear though on the 18th of March when Boris Johnson signalled that London could be facing a lockdown, and we were ready to preemptively close our London headquarters building on the 20th of March. And then on the following Monday, when Boris Johnson announced the wider lockdown, we were ready to implement closures across the whole of our UK network. And so over the course of that week, we safely decanted all 10,000 of our UK staff from our 54 offices and 1,500 staff based throughout Europe in 10 offices to working from home, with service delivery largely uninterrupted. And I suppose it went better than we thought it might do. It was regarded as a major success, both by our internal business stakeholders and our clients. The challenges, though, we faced over the last 11 weeks are definitely not unique, and different recipes and different companies might have got to the same result. We're all very much in learning mode, so I'm really pleased to be here today to share my experience and hear from others. I'm going to start with the existing structure that was in place, the business resilience structure. SNC-Lavalin had a robust business resilience program and a dedicated executive level global crisis management team and regional equivalents in place. We had a regional crisis management team chaired by our UK and Europe CEO, with senior representatives from across the business, including all of our support functions. But that wasn't enough. The key insight was the inclusion of a project director and project management team was a really important overlay due to the scale of the crisis and the sheer amount of work that needed to be done by a broad range of stakeholders in a short period. So as PD, I think as some of the other colleagues on the call have said, my first discovery was that our business continuity plans had been designed largely for isolated events, and they needed to be revisited to respond to what is, obviously an unprecedented pandemic event. So we had to start again with the end in mind, and we had to think about shifting operations. The original plans were very much about shifting operations to nearby offices and in the event of a closure, and that clearly wasn't going to work. So we had to manage the health risks while the offices were still occupied and at the same time prepare for potential closures. So we formed a dedicated enable team of experts who we met daily to progress critical actions. And we had additional working groups stood up to progress around various dimensions of remote working, best practice and business continuity. We were fortunate, I suppose, one of the key things that we were fortunate, we had an established network of house leaders across this big estate of offices. And we had an early deliverable was a house leader guide to enable them to develop their local business continuity plans for the new situation. And it was about this getting the right balance of central content to local tailoring, both regionally throughout countries and between countries. Obviously, each country had its own government and government guidance, as well as the overall WHO guidance. So as we advanced, we had an eye on potential closures. We started to further enhance our remote working capacity. I suppose we were pretty lucky that we had a real push in two areas over the past 3 to 4 years that gave us a great platform. We were a mature, agile working business, and 99% of our staff had laptops and were really quite experienced in using Skype. And we'd also had a 3-year investment program in digital service delivery in things like BIM, digital design and collaboration tools. So both have been absolutely vital in achieving the levels of continuity and productivity we've achieved. Our networks, though, were designed for about 30% remote working, so there was this real shortfall. But we pushed and pushed and pushed, and by the 23rd of March, we had capacity for all 11,500 staff to work remotely, just in time for the lockdown that week. So, yeah, our investment in digital service delivery, I think this is something that's been pretty key for us, has enabled us to do a lot virtually and remotely, and what we used to do with sort of physical and local paper-based activity. We've been designing and modeling our clients' assets in 3 dimensions and common data environments that enables us to have disparate groups of staff and clients working simultaneously to develop and check designs from regions around the world. And the crisis is built on this great platform, and we're seeing a lot of extra demand for these services now. Some of our clients are awarding us extra work because we're managing to maintain delivery and efficiency. So communications have been vital to keep our staff informed, to keep morale up, and show our clients that we're open for business and able to deliver in new ways. We did, alongside our Enable team, we had 3 other groups. We had some business level crisis management teams at the front line, focused on using the newly enabled remote working to deliver the business, keep the business going. We had an external influencing team to liaise with government and competitors, industry bodies, to keep the work flowing and share industry best practice. We had a planning team to look at cost mitigation measures and determine the sort of longer term post-lockdown strategy. I suppose some key learning points from me over the last 11 weeks. So there's a bit of, I'll rattle these off, there's a few of them. So I suppose you recognise this is a long-term issue, not a one-week crisis. As sometimes can be the case. Ensure the team doesn't burn out. A lot of long calls, early mornings and late finishes. So got to keep an eye on the well-being of your crisis management team. Surround yourself with functional experts, but you've got to be really clear with the experts who's making the business decisions. Have a plan, but recognize that it doesn't survive first contact. It needs to be updated daily. Divide your thinking between short, medium and long term, and preferably have sort of separate groups of people thinking about each stage, but do try and maintain some overlap between the various groups to shorten communication lines. Delegate as much as possible. Have some thinking time. It can be, you know, back-to-back calls. You can get swept along, so have some thinking time. Have a regular drumbeat of meetings and communications. And one thing we found absolutely vital was having our communications teams engaged in the process, you know, as core members of the team, not just told to write the press release or the internal announcement. Things were moving too quickly to enable that. So to sum up, we successfully delivered business continuity for 11,500 staff across 80 offices in 11 countries to a new remote working mode over a 3-week period on the basis of some luck. I think we all need a bit of luck, foresight, as we call that in business, really, and some good old-fashioned project discipline combined with sort of lots of communication, energy and drive. I suppose at this point the business has settled into its new remote operating mode, and with thoughts are now turning optimistically to the future and capitalising on the opportunities that C19 and the post-C19 world represents. Yeah, and we all expect infrastructure to be at the forefront of any stimulus, so we're looking forward to that. And my day job now has turned to planning the safe and secure return of a small group of our staff working on complex and secure projects who cannot effectively work from home, following, you know, Boris Johnson's latest announcement on Sunday.
Anthony, thank you very much. Even though you did say to me at the beginning that you only focus on UK and Europe and within the containment of 11,000 staff, but you seem to give us a very global perspective within your, what I call, you know, crisis management one. And it seems to be consistent with others where you said nobody ever planned for pandemic. I think that was a key message. Whatever crisis management process that one has, whether it's insurable, not insurable, nobody ever planned for a pandemic, and perhaps this is one in a lifetime experience. We can only pray and hope that we don't get another pandemic in our lifetime, because managing this particular experience hasn't been easy, whether you're a small company or a large company or a country focused or a global focused entity. Nobody ever anticipated that we will have a situation that we have. But the reality of it, from all the speaker, is we still went on, we continued our business, and we've been able to deliver. So I want to thank all of you for your contribution towards that time. We've actually managed to, you know, get back on time, so I'm really pleased about that. In about a few minutes' time, I believe that, you know, Barbara will open the question and answer session to those who are online. But I want to start off by putting a few questions to the panelists. And I'll start from Chituwa. I did know that you raised the concern that you are focusing on Zambia and your experience in that area. I suspect if we start from that focus point and move up to the big boys, perhaps you know, help us. So did you find that your members actually have a pandemic crisis management process in place? Did you find, was there any member of yours that actually claimed that they had a pandemic crisis management in place? And if they do, how real was it in implementation? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Nelson, for that question. I did ask my members if they did have a plan, a pandemic plan, and unfortunately, nobody had one. Nobody had a pandemic plan. So they had, some of them had plans, but not, you know, the usual risk assessment plans and so on and so forth. But they had been shelved. A few of them had them and they were reviewing them because of the same pandemic. But in general, to be honest, Nelson, they didn't have. So this is a gap that we've seen. And now going forward as an MA, as an association, we'll now encourage all our MAs to have some plan in place.
Thank you very much. I'm going to go to Mitch now. Mitch, you were or you're still in the heart of it. All the statistics are saying if United States survive it, then the rest of the world will survive it. All the headlines at the moment, the figures are in the 80,000 and you are in the heart of it. And from your standpoint, having a global client base and sector expertise, I'm very much in what I call the social infrastructure side. In another word, not road, not rail, but very much in the health sector, education, and big corporate offices. Did you have a plan in place, and is your plan close to this, even though this is a mega one?
Well, the good news is we had a plan, not specifically for a pandemic, but you realize that having been New Yorkers and continue to be living and working in New York, we survived 9/11, and then we survived the Superstorm Sandy, both of which caused us to be out of our offices for considerable periods of time. So we had been working on and continuing to fine-tune our disaster recovery business continuity plan, which included a significant component from working outside of the metropolitan New York area. Interestingly enough, we had actually started migrating all of our digital platform into the cloud using BIM 360. We had already set up emergency communication network, and quite frankly, when we executed the plan, we did a Friday check, sent everybody home and said, okay, just in case it happens over the weekend, we're ready to go. It went unbelievably well, shockingly well. And quite frankly, it's worked so well, and I'll get into some of the specifics. Our productivity with working remotely has actually increased. Our time spent on projects has gone down. That we try to attribute, what was the rationale for that positive change, and it's because less time is wasted going to meetings, going from out to clients' offices. We can do it all virtually now. So it has actually been a very interesting paradigm and successful to the point where we all believe, and I think this is going to be pretty much across all disciplines, that this work from home scenario will become part of the norm. And the old norm will never come back that way. I think it's going to be an interesting blend of work from home and distributed offices. So to the extent that we had a plan, it worked. Will this change our plan going forward? Absolutely. And the lessons learned is that no matter how hard you plan, you can never plan for every contingency. And once again, Mother Nature showed us that we weren't ready.
Thanks very much, Mitch. I'm coming to you, Matt. Now, you said the word earlier that have a plan, but constantly review the plan and monitoring, and have a number of key metrics to actually make sure that you are delivering against that plan. And if I wind the clock back now, virtually every part of the world that I've seen, whether it's Central Europe or Central Asia or North America or even some countries in Africa, they always have a plan and sort of a measurable target. The question is, when you find that you are not actually going to achieve that target, how quickly do you find that company really need to respond and reset that target? Because I think the key word you said is about having a plan, measure it, and keep monitoring it. That's dynamic. How quickly do you think management need to respond to this issue? Bearing in mind that we've never gone through pandemic before. Thank you.
Thank you, Nelson. Yeah, I think you need to be very dynamic in your response. So let's say getting new information in is key. So once the information or let's say the parameters that you're measuring indicate that there's a deviation from your strategy, I think you need to respond quite quickly. But also determine with your specialistic team, with internal in your company, to say, okay, does it make sense? How let's say, what's the impact of your response? Do you need to change on the spot, or can you allow to wait? And what's then the consequence? So it's actually, I think it was mentioned by one of the panelists earlier. It's a bit like project management. You need to identify key parameters in your plan and follow them strictly. And yeah, you need to be flexible enough to adapt. So to answer your question, yeah, you need to be very dynamic in that.
Thanks very much. I'm coming to Anthony. I enjoyed the idea that you said to me that the only time people start worrying about this thing, apart from going about their ski slope, issue, because you have different crises in the past. You always say, well, this is this part of the world. It's not going to impact us, but when it gets close to home, whereby your ski holiday is going to be impacted, and you are being called in by the chief financial officer to say, we have a problem, then that becomes a real issue. So I put it to you, moving from business development, presumably because you have that broader view of business development and where the sectors are moving, presumably you are able to slot in very quickly and look at it. And I just want to put a question, which is particularly to you, to say, understanding that you have provision for maybe working from home and capacity on network for 30%, and perhaps 90% of your staff have laptop, that obviously helps. How do you manage to migrate to go very quickly from 30% capacity from working from home to close to 100% over a short period? Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you. So yeah, absolutely vital. I mean, suppose we only needed 30% because we only had a relatively small proportion of our staff in normal times work from home full time. And then we had a group of people that were, in and out of the office the odd day. So there was a mobile workforce. But effectively that had prepared everyone. Everyone had had a taste of mobile working or working from home. They'd always done a little bit themselves. And it really was then, with just a matter of over a period of a week or two with our IT providers, negotiating and making sure we weren't back of the queue for those extra license for the remote login. So obviously the network had been designed largely to be operated from within our offices with a bit on the periphery, 30%. And when you're switching that around, obviously that has a big implication for the remote parts of the network. So we did some testing and we rapidly scaled. I think it was one of those metrics. You talked about metrics. That was our key metric in the crisis management team. Was daily and sometimes more than once a day was a graph of what capacity we needed against what capacity we had on a daily basis. So. And luckily those 2 points came together, but it's a combination of a great internal IT team and it's some great external providers as well.
Thank you very much. I'm going to put a general question to all panelists now. We've talked about whether it's V or U or W shape. The question is, what is just going around the panel? What do we think we should be looking at now, that recognizing that different parts of the world are actually at different phase of this issue? What do you think we should be doing? Should we have a global standard in dealing with the pandemics? Or is it the case that, different country, different size of company will address it in their own different way? Should there be a sort of a global standard on how we deal with pandemics? I'll start off with Mitch.
Yeah, thank you, Nelson. I guess the good news is that human beings are human beings, right? So whether they're in New York or Zambia or in the UK, what this pandemic has showed us is that human nature is human nature, and that people after 13 weeks of being locked down in their houses want to get out. I think the smart money is going towards that there will be a second peak. And there'll be an adjustment as to what the policies will be to control that second peak. I mean, I seriously hope that we don't need to go back to a full lockdown again. I think that would have just biblical economic repercussions. But I think people and businesses need to understand that there will be a second, I think there's going to be a second surge, that they'll have to exercise mature decision-making and constrain their people, and their clients are going to be doing the same. So, and my other fear, and I have many people in my camp, that the economic recovery will be a lot slower than the governments would like us to believe, and because of that, people are going to be holding cash, and so it's going to be a very slow start, and I hope that people are cautious and don't make rash decisions and make quick changes in their MO.
Thanks very much. Yeah. Do you have the view, Mark, on the subject?
Yes, I think, like you said, there are many differences in different countries and in how the situation evolves. And I think what we've seen in looking from a country perspective, in the beginning of the crisis, is that everyone was trying to develop his own plan and attack the crisis as they thought it was logical from their perspective. And what I've seen, let's say, gradually is that countries much more share their practices, look at each other, what works, what doesn't work. So what I've seen in companies is actually the opposite. So I think companies, when you look at the Dutch top 12 engineering firms, right from the start, and that's also, let's say, leadership in this crisis, right from the start, the top of these companies joined together, shared the practice, what does work, what doesn't work, raising questions, how can we deal with it in this kind of situation regarding staff or regarding measures that you're taking to protect your cash. So I truly believe that it's key that sharing information, learning from each other is the best way to approach this.
Thank you very much. I have one question coming from floor. I'm not going to start picking up questions from the floor. I think I will try and paraphrase this question. I think it goes along, I think it's from Chakra Varama from Sandy. And the question goes, do you see a behavior change from employers to include better insurance provision in particular condition of contract of documents? So I think this is to do with, do we see any issue about behavioral change for employers to include better insurance provision? Anthony, is this something that your company consider?
Afraid not. Maybe one of my other colleagues. We haven't changed any insurance provisions for our staff.
Okay. Let me rephrase that question. Have you noticed that now that more and more people are working from home, do you notice there's any behavior change between staff when they're in the office compared to when they're home? I hear from Mitch earlier on to say productivity is much higher, the downtime is low, and people are working harder. Is that sustainable?
Yeah, really good point, actually. The days are very long and very similar. You don't have the variety from day to day. You don't have that social interaction, the ability to walk around the office and bump into people that you wouldn't see. It's much more structured on a daily basis, and there's a danger that your world and your group becomes very much your screen and your Zoom screen or your Teams screen, just that smaller group of people. And you tend to speak to those people more perhaps than you ever did before. So yeah, there's different behaviors. We have seen some improvements in productivity. Obviously some areas that require a lot of collaboration and a lot of creative things, architecture, things like that. There's a bit more of a pull for those people to get back together and get around the whiteboard and do that stuff. But I think generally we've been surprised at how efficient and effective it's been, and how little impact it's had on the business. The only real impacts obviously is where the market, the external market, has been weakest, and people are talking about shapes of recovery. I think the aviation market globally is a big infrastructure market, and is going to be down for some time. So that could be an L shape. We hope it's a U shape and it will pick up, but that could be an L shape. So yeah.
Thank you very much. I see another question coming from the floor. I think is from Charles Akindayomi, if I got it right. Sorry for the pronunciation. I think the question is actually directed to you. Anthony said, did you have a need to develop a formal written protocol for working from home that mimics how to work in the office? Do you have to develop a formal protocol, or did people just get on with it and do it?
Yeah, I think people generally got on with it, but we did put lots of documentation. There's some people are not that familiar with these IT tools, so we had the guidance documents on that. Obviously, people's mental well-being actually in this environment. We've given our line managers extra guidance to touch base with their team members more regularly than perhaps they would have done in the past, even when they were in the office. So yeah, we put a lot of extra documentation in place and training materials to help our people work in this new manner.
Mitch, did you have to put a new protocol in place, you know?
Well, we are in the process of doing it. I mean, it was interesting because I think the staff were so enthralled with the idea of working from home that they, as I said, their productivity went up. The amount of idle time that they spent going to meetings and transportation and, as you say, hanging around the water cooler just evaporated. One of the concerns we have now is quite the opposite, is that how do we get people to get re-engaged with other employees? How do you maintain the culture of the firm when you have no face-to-face or person-to-person contact? And we're looking to our peers to see how they handle it. One of the situation was having your Zoom on with the immediate people that you would sit next to anyway. Leave it on as if you were sitting at your desk. And of course, if you need to mute or turn the camera off, you do that. But the idea was to try to get people back into being more social, so that we don't lose that we call our secret sauce, the esprit de corps that you get by the firm culture by being in an office.
Thank you. There's a question. This is to do with force majeure. My answer to that is very simple, because the panelists will not be dealing with that, which is there a plan to revise force majeure clause of FIDIC to include pandemic clause and delay cost in the region? My answer to that is, please visit our website and look at what was done on COVID-19 regarding force majeure. There's a guideline that's provided there, and it tells you what FIDIC is doing or what FIDIC has done. There is a question which is to Chituwa. How in Zambia industry management in COVID-19 context is being organized? How can your association be helpful for industry worker? This is to Chituwa. How can your association be helpful to workers in dealing with organizing and what the industry is looking at in Zambia?
Okay, I mentioned in my earlier talk that the association was very instrumental in coming up with what is known as a debt swap between the government and the Revenue Authority. This gave a breather to our members. So it's such initiatives that the association now is looking into going forward. There's also been a holiday offered by some banks. So the association again is approaching banks and asking them to say, could you please give a break to our members who are affected obviously with the COVID-19 pandemic. There is also a 10 billion stimulus package that has been given by the Bank of Zambia. Again, we're encouraging our members to go and access these funds because they've been made available. So that's what the association right now is trying to do with regards to helping our members. Even going forward, the association plans to work obviously with FIDIC, which has been doing so already. But I think it's imperative now that there should be more trainings. We should enhance the skill. There should be an enhancement of skill transfer, sharing of technological know-how and best practice. So the association is definitely going to look at all those avenues to help the members.
Okay, thank you very much. I mean, I would just make reference to Mitchel's comment earlier on that the ACEZ are doing quite a lot in the United States to engage government, not only in promoting investment in infrastructure, but also of incentive that can help on payment. I do know as well in Europe, there are a number of government, both in Netherlands, in Amsterdam, and goes through across in UK, that is a furlough system that helps company to put their staff on temporary employment and being paid for 80%. The same thing goes also in Switzerland. So there's a number of schemes that are already in place for those who want to know. And if you really want to get to know a lot about this, please, focus on companies where they have government policy that can help. There is a question here which is actually targeted towards Mitch. If I've got it right, I'm trying to pick it up. It was something to do with insurance. Mitch, I think the question goes to you. It said, other members of the panel can also answer it. Is how is insurance company having to respond to claim or claims, if any, from your firm? If there are issues that is coming through and you have to respond to the issue of claims, is this something that you've actually looked at, Mitch?
The answer is, that was the first thing we looked at. So one of the issues was when the pandemic hit, there was obviously a significant interruption to business, and many of the firms carry business interruption coverage. So the first thing we did was we reached out to our carriers and said, okay, is there a basis for a claim? And much to our chagrin, apparently a pandemic is an exclusion in our business interruption policy. Much like our insurance company, when we had the Superstorm Sandy hit, it turns out the flood component was also excluded in our business interruption. We were out of our office for 3.5 months. So the insurance companies seem to be ahead of us. We're hoping, certainly in the States, that the government will take a look at these exclusions to see whether or not that was an unfair business practice. But an ACEC is very much at the front of that, pushing on behalf of the members to see if there is a way to open that up. But currently, no claims are being permitted under the pandemic coverage.
It's interesting, Mitchel, that you said that because we spend one of our panel section looking at the risk and insurance side of it. This seems to be a constant message that the insurance market are pretty good to make sure the exclusion, when you do need them, they're never there to support, whether it's flood or something like that. Anthony, did you have to deal with this issue through the insurance company, or is it the same message that pandemic is not included in your insurance cover and therefore there's no scope at all?
I'm afraid I don't have the answer to that, but I don't think it, like as Mitchell said, I think the insurance companies are ahead of us really with this sort of stuff. So I've heard from other businesses in the UK, you hear it in the press, that pandemic was excluded. So it's a big issue across a range of companies in the UK.
I mean, there's a lot of questions coming through from the floor to talk about specific contract on project, and I'll keep referring back to please visit our previous webinar where we talked about force majeure and contract and clauses in contract, because we do not intend to cover that. But FIDIC has produced a guidance note, as Chituwa referred to earlier on, which specifically deal with COVID-19 and force majeure. Please, refer to that. The other point that I was going to bring to the attention is that how effective are we as an industry to respond? Because, I mean, the question that you tend to look at is, I try not to look at consulting industry by itself. I look at the consulting industry as part of a bigger industry, whether it's to do with big infrastructure or social infrastructure or economic infrastructure. Do we feel, compared to the financial institution with the bank and all that area, that we are quick and effective in responding to major issue? I mean, this is an open question for me. It's not from the floor. I'm just trying to put that across. Mark, do you think our industry is quick and agile?
In general, I do think that there are really good examples where the industry is taking leadership, and especially the engineering industry, because we have a lot to offer. Let's say, if you look at the construction industry, infrastructure, it's not only engineering associations, but also the construction associations. You have to work hand in hand together to see that you can benefit the overall economy. So what I mean by that is the engineering firms, also let's say in the Netherlands, when we're talking to the Ministry of Infrastructure, we clearly articulated that we can play a very important role in accelerating new programs or starting up new programs for projects. Because let's say in the preparation stage, engineering firms play a key role in communication, in permitting, etc., and preparing the scopes for these projects. And that's actually the area for the engineering firms, in my view. And I see really good examples where MAs step up, and not only in the Netherlands, but in many countries, also in Europe, step up and have that discussion with the government and really point out what's our position as engineering industry. So I do believe there are very good examples, Nelson.
Mitch, do you have a view on that subject? Are we agile, quick enough?
Yeah, the answer is yes. And during my remarks, I mentioned that the engineering community and the contracting community in the U.S. stepped up to the plate when we realized that there was a significant shortage of beds to be able to handle the crisis if it continued at the rate of escalation that it certainly started at. And we were in New York able to build over $1 billion worth of healthcare in less than a month, and literally make them patient ready. So the engineering component, and in that case, the contracting component, were ready, willing, and able to do what was necessary. They pivoted immediately. The problem that I think we all see down the future is not whether we can respond and adapt, it's our clients. What are they ready, willing, and able to do? And are they willing to start spending money in the expectation that this too will end?
It's interesting you raised that, Mitch, because what I find out in my other world is that a lot of the clients are not ready. In fact, in consulting world, are helping them.
We're ready.
and we are trying to give them an idea on how we can continue with the project while the physical side of the project is being delayed. I mean, Anthony, what's your take? Do you find that a lot of your clients are ready for this sort of issue and working from home is normal for them? Or they're able to respond on time?
Yeah, well, you know, we you know, just on what Mitch said, actually, we you know, I think all engineers like problems. So, you know, we have a really big play, you know, that we thrive on problems and problem solving. So I think it's absolutely, you know, made for us. We sit like Mitch, we had some what we called Nightingale hospitals that we had to put up at pretty short order. And we had to flex some resources also around the globe to keep things moving. But I think, again, we agree with Mitch, it very much does depend on the longer term position. We've got a lot of government clients obviously at the moment with a lot of stimulus. So I suppose some of our markets are pretty buoyant at the moment, actually, even compared to normal times, they're pretty buoyant. And I suppose it's how long that buoyancy and enthusiasm amongst some of our clients lasts into the later parts of the year and early next year, really, and how quickly some of those more impacted markets like aviation come back. That's our concern.
Okay, thank you. We have roughly about 5 minutes before we wrap up. In my usual manner, I'm putting a question to all of you, including to our president. One word, one sentence, if possible. Is it that we've dealt with quite a lot, and knowing fully that we are at different time scale of this COVID-19 in different parts of geography, what are the things that you think you would like to recommend to FIDIC and the industry to do in a collaborative manner? Because we've talked about it should not be a contentious industry, we should be more collaborative, we should look at joint development. What would be your advice? I'm going to start off with Anthony, since you spoke last. Your quick advice.
Quick advice, I suppose, is just to continue to share. Stuff like this is brilliant. We found both clients, competitors, industry bodies like this, it's been invaluable, really. We're all learning here, so that's absolutely vital. But as an industry, I think it's all about building this underlying agility, flexibility, and a mobile workforce so we can respond to whatever crisis comes along in future.
Okay, thank you very much. Mitch?
Yeah, and following up on Anthony, I think collaboration, the lesson learned, I think, from all of this is that the more we are able to communicate peer-to-peer and industry to industry, the more we learn, the more we share best practices, the better we will all be. And secondly, to let our clients know that we are all ready and open for business and here to help in any way we can.
Thank you very much, Mitch. Chituwa, your advice? Can you
more training? Yes, I can hear you. For me, I would insist on more training, skills transfer, technological know-how. And as Anthony said, this is an excellent platform to learn and share. So more such activities going forward. I think it shouldn't end here. I think this is a program that should continue at some point as we battle this COVID-19.
Thank you very much, Chituwa. Mark?
Yes, I think it's already mentioned, but I think we have a collective problem. We deal with the same issues, and I think it's the right timing for FIDIC, but also for member associations to step up and to bring that collective effort together, share your best practices, and really connect to your members and to your member firms. So I think that's really the right timing. So it's an opportunity actually for associations, but also for member associations to create bonds and liaisons with construction industry and other sectors. So I think that's the positive element of it. There's a negative element to it as well, because I do believe that we need to be very realistic, and people tend to, let's say, grasp and hold on to some hope or some positive things that may happen. So what I mean by that is, if we open up our economies again, we may run into new problems. And we know for sure that in some sectors, we talk about infrastructure sectors, but if you look at the oil and gas sector, it's almost a double crisis, because with the oil prices down, there will be a lot of investment that are stopped. So let's say many companies are active in the oil and gas sector, have difficulties. And also, let's say, in future, there will be, let's say, a lack of finance to really start up new projects. And economies will start with cost reduction to, let's say, to bring all these measures that have been placed, to bring them in the right perspective and to pay that back. So I think it will be a long-term issue. Yes, we must be positive, but we should be really realistic in what's happening and not be too optimistic.
Okay, thank you very much, Mark. Bill, I'm going to ask you 1 or 2 sentences to wrap up. Bill, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nelson. First of all, I'd like to thank everybody for participating today. The dialogue in this session has, as usual, been outstanding, as have been the questions. Some of the thoughts that I was jotting down to address your question, Nelson, is certainly the opportunity that FIDIC has to share lessons learned with all the countries around the world. As horrible as this pandemic is, it's impressive to me that FIDIC is helping and facilitating communication with so many people and industry experts from all over the world. I think that's terrific. There are claims coming, there will be difficulties coming, and there will be financial struggles, all sorts of difficulties. But in the midst of that, everything we can do to encourage collaboration with all elements of the folks we deal with, from clients all the way down to suppliers, I think will demonstrate the value that engineers can bring. If we're not careful, the whole world could find themselves in massive disputes over these issues, and trying everything we can do to recognize other people's and other firms' issues helps towards collaboration. So that's what I would say about the situation we're in. I'd also like to add one more, which I mentioned in my opening remarks as well, is this pandemic has been brutal to everyone and will continue to change a lot of things in the future. But one thing that I think we can all agree that has not changed is the need to address climate change and some of the severe infrastructure problems that we had before the pandemic and that we will have afterwards. And as environmental engineer, the first thing that comes to my mind, of course, is water and sanitation and water resource issues to deal with sea level rise. These issues are huge, and they still need to be addressed. And I believe that FIDIC can help in continuing to keep folks' attention on those. And one of the strategies we have to do that is with trying to re-energize our state of the world practices through social media and that kind of thing. So you'll hopefully be seeing some things in that regard in the future. So I think that's a little more than 2 minutes, Nelson. But
it is definitely more than 2 minutes. Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to say massive thank you to all the participants, wherever you come from, all over the world. I hope you are keeping safe where you are. I want to say massive thank you to also our panel speaker, Mitch, Mark, Anthony, and Chituwa, also including Bill. Thank you very much for your time. Some of you had to get up very early in the morning to be with us, and thank God we don't have anybody who's staying very late to join us, because sometimes we do have a speaker from Australia. I'm also, delighted to say thank you very much to our member staff who are behind the scene, Barbara, Andy, and all of them, Graham, to make sure all our systems are working the way they should be. Massive thank you to all the FIDIC members worldwide who are contributing to this debate. Few takeaway from me. I think it's quite obvious that we are going through uncharted territory, no doubt about it. None of us has actually faced this pandemic. We pray and hope that during our lifetime, we don't have to face this. But having said that, the need for business continuity is absolutely important, imperative. It doesn't matter how much planning you put in place, whether it's for epidemic, pandemic, or flood, or whatever it is. Key messages are very simple. Yes, have a plan. Absolutely have a plan. But make sure your plan is not dormant, is actually agile, is flexible, is constantly being reviewed. Set yourself a clear target of things you want to measure against, and have management team and task force set up to be responsible for monitoring this activity, so that you are in a position where you can monitor whether they're working, whether they're not working. Over and above that, the issue about collaboration has been talked about several times, absolutely important. Different countries are in different time zone of development. And yet you may be in an area where you've got 100% of laptop available to all your staff, 10,000, and then you are in other parts of the world where they don't have the technology, or they do have the technology, they don't have the energy to make it happen, and different issue. All along within this issue, the key message is about people. How do we manage our people? How do we make sure that our industry together and make sure we are ready beyond COVID-19? Over and above that, our industry, are we agile enough? I think the answer is yes, we are. But maybe not good enough, and it's never good enough. We need to keep working at it and to make sure we are on top of the game. And we need to convey the message to government that investing in infrastructure, both social infrastructure, hospital, school, are very critical to help us to come out of this economy. Second point, we need to help our client. Help our client to make sure we are ready to support them. And let the government know their industry is ready to support. But more important, at the heart of what we do is our people. Have a contingency planning, and make sure that you don't place reliance on insurance only, because insurance, when you do need them, they will disappoint you. But make sure that at least you have things that you can control and you can manage. But investing in your people, investing in infrastructure is absolutely critical. On that note, I'm going to introduce to you the next issue that we'll be dealing with is about communicating your response, both internally and externally. In all the conversation that we have in the 10 webinars and all throughout the recommendation of the panel speaker today, one subject that keeps coming up is about communication. Communicate, communicate, and communicate. This is very important. You need to identify your stakeholder. You need to know how the issues are. So how are we dealing with this as an industry? Whether you are a member association, whether you are FIDIC as a corporate, whether you are a company, whether you are small or medium or large, communication is absolutely imperative to your staff, to your management, to your team, and to external stakeholder, to client, to government, to policymaker. This is absolutely important. So I hope you'll be able to join us on Monday to deal with communicating your response both internally and externally. On that note, I hope you are keeping safe wherever you are. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for your contribution, and keep safe. Thank you very much. God bless. Bye.